In this tutorial, we are going to examine how to write the analysis section of your findings. Now, this particular tutorial will show you how to describe and explain and analyze, which is the key command word, all of the data that you've already presented. And the data you've presented will be coming in the form of a range of graphs, maps, statistical tests, photographs, and diagrams. And that is just the presentation stage of your data, which was the previous tutorial. So here we're actually now starting to write about it. And before I look at how to do this, you're going to be organizing it in terms of the 3 research questions. And I'll show you what that should therefore look like. And you're going to be thinking about the research question that you're writing about. And you're basically going to be answering that research question. So that by the end of each of your 3 research questions, where you've written your analysis on your graphs, we should have some kind of definitive answer to the research question. Okay, and I'll show you what that looks like, because I'm going to take you through 3 examples which explore how to analyze data and what are the key things that you are looking to do. Right, if we have a look at the SQA Mark Scheme, there are 3 aspects to good analysis. So once you have a couple of graphs and maybe a statistical test and a map or 2 linked to a research question, so you've completed your data presentation of all of the data you gathered for that research question, you're now looking to write about what your graphs and charts and maps all show. And the first thing you're aiming to do is linking them together. So when you present data on a research question, there must be common links between that data. Why is that? Because it's got the same common research question. So you are looking to connect 2 different graphs, or a graph and a photograph, or a graph and a map, or a statistical test and a graph. So whatever you're using to present your data, you are looking to make those links. And if we have a look at the Mark scheme, you want those links to be clear and explicit in order to get this top band of marks. So what that really looks like is figure 3, a scatter graph of, and then it'd be, you just tell me what it is, clearly shows, and then you would describe what the results show. So there would be some description of the piece of data presentation, and it would probably refer to particular values in the data or the map that you're presenting. What you would then say is the results here are clearly shown in diagram 6, which is a photograph of site 3. And as we can see in this photograph, and then you would talk about the photograph and what the link between the photograph and the graph or the scatter graph or whatever it is are. So making clear and explicit links between your different figures or diagrams that you're using to present your data is a key, or one of the 3 important keys. Another key link you want to be making throughout is where you then link that to your overall aim, or what's called the wider context. So that can look like a couple of things. You could be writing about research question 1 and have made some observation where you've got some data that you're presenting in research question 2, and that actually the data that you're presenting in research question 2 could be used to explain some of your findings in research question 1. Or you might have a photograph in research question 3 that clearly shows something that might be relevant to research question 1. So you make a connection not just within the research question, but between the research questions. And that's a very important task if you're going to be looking to accessing the 11 and 12 mark section. So you might, for example, say, the scatter graph in research question 3 examines the key relationship between X and Y. It could be whatever you're studying. And this shows that there is a positive relationship between these 2 variables. This might explain this result that I'm finding in research question 1, which is, and then you would explain what it was. Okay, so that is connecting the research questions, because of course your 3 research questions are all connected by one common aim. And that is why you're looking to connect or integrate your 3 research questions into an overall narrative. Finally, similarities and contradictions between datasets and related theories. So what should that look like? Well, this is where you connect a result that you have discovered to an actual piece of background research that you unearthed in the chapter called background research. So, for example, if you are doing a river study and you're looking at downstream changes and you've discovered that the discharge increased by a substantial quantity from the source of the river to the mouth of the river, you might then say that this directly is proved by the Bradshaw model, or you could say is similar to what the Bradshaw model suggested. Or if there's actually a contradiction, if your results are not the same as the theory you've talked about, let's say the pH increased in your soil and the theory that you had been talking about in your background research suggested it should decrease, then you would say so, and you must explicitly say so. So you could say, my findings in my background research by Dr. Thompson revealed that the pH should increase by 20% as you move down the slope. My results, however, show that this decrease has only occurred by 15%, a 5% difference. So that is explicitly linking your results to related theories that we can see here. Now, apart from being clear and explicit all the way through, you're also looking to continually reflect back on the research question. Everything you write about must reflect back to whatever is the actual question. Okay, so don't just present data and then randomly talk about it, but don't think about it. But you must think about it in terms of the question that you're actually looking to answer. If you have an hypothesis, you obviously clearly want to have some kind of statement about whether that hypothesis has proven to be accurate, or not accurate, or partially accurate. Okay, now what I'd like to do is show you some examples of how students can go about doing this. So in the guidelines, in the website, you will find 3 examples. I'm just going to open them for you. So in this first example, the student is set out a research question exactly the way I would hope they would. They have got the research question titled and they're reminding me what the research question is. They've got some data presentation. They've done a stats test. They've done a proportional symbols map. And they've got a photograph. So they've got 3 bits of data presentation that they are using to present their results. What analysis are they doing? Well, their first bit of analysis is where they've done a chi-square test. So they've done a statistical test of their data set, and they're even presenting their little table of their results. They've got the result, which they tell us allows them to reject a null hypothesis. We can see that down here. And they tell us what that means. They then link it to the background research, where they tell us that their survey findings showed that there was an opposition to new homes, and that varied between countries and cities, and that their results are borne out by that background research. So there is an explicit link between what they're finding in terms of the results of a chi-square test and what they wrote about when they were writing their background research. Here we can see they're presenting their results in terms of a site being developed and people's attitudes towards it who live in the neighborhood. And we can see a little bit of description. So that's also important. Figure 10 shows, so this is figure 10. So they're actually telling me about the figure that they're writing about. And they give us a brief description of what the figure shows. So you do want a little bit of description of your data presentation. You don't want it to be too extensive. You just want to give the overall summary of the highlights. So what was the most, what was the least? Okay. They've used a photograph to illustrate one of their data points, and they've talked a little bit about that. So overall, figure 10 suggests there is a relationship between individual level of opposition and their distance. And we can see that Poplar Crescent, which is one of our streets, which this one here, had the highest level of opposition, and that was largely because it was very close to the development. I would suggest that the student maybe annotated this, but there is not necessarily a need for it because of the nature of the data presentation. And then as we go further into this, we can see a bit more explanation. Here, they actually talk about why there is opposition, and they're linking it to their background research again. And we can see that this differs from my background research. Finally, we get the other final key thing that I was just talking about a second ago. What does that mean in terms of the hypothesis? Is it proven or not? Which this student has said it's partially correct. And then a kind of comment in terms of the overall aim in relation to this one research question. So there's one example of how a student has written their analysis. If we have a look at this second example, we can see a different type of project. This time we're looking at a slope with soil and gradient and its soil moisture. Once again, research question 1 is clearly laid out. The research question is written about. The student starts with what figure 1 and 2 show. So there's figure 1 and there's figure 2. They should, of course, have named these figure 1 and 2, so I can clearly see that as the reader. And they tell us about what they show. So they've got a bit of description of the data and the correlation between these two variables. If we go further, they've got an explanation for why the data is showing that. And they've got a mini conclusion linked to the background research. So this conclusion matches my background research, and they've actually making that link. And they're being explicit. They're telling me about the link. The student here then does a statistical test to test the relationship. They report the result in the way that they should report a result because they've done a Pearson test. They tell us that they're rejecting the null hypothesis. And they tell us that this is important because it adds statistical certainty about the relationship between these two variables. They go on to talk a little bit about figure 2, another scatter graph. They do another statistical test. And then when we get to the end, they're telling me overall my data for pH does match the theories highlighted in my background research. However, not to the level significant enough to prove sufficient evidence to prove my hypothesis. So they're telling me the hypothesis isn't proven in relation to soil pH. They've got a bit of background research in the study of, and they tell us how it links into the background research, and they do a further bit of linking to their background research. In here, there is also explanation of the results. So they're telling me why do they think the results were the way they were. And because one of the data points produced an anomaly, the student included a photograph of that data point with an explanation for why that site had a different pH to the other sites, and they give a reason in this annotated photo. Right, let's have a look at the third example of what is a good findings. So in this case, the student is doing their third research question, and they've put both their research question and their hypothesis into a text box. What they've got is a very interesting bit of data presentation where they've put their graphs in alongside a photograph, and they've got a scatter graph here, and they've got arrows linking the bars in the graph to either an annotation or to the photo. In terms of the analysis, we get, for figure 12, we get told about some information. So figure 12 highlights, so here we can see what figure 12 shows. Here we've got some explanation for why it does that. Here we've got some explicit linking to background research, some theory, okay, that what is expected. And they clearly then link it to whether what was expected in theory, whether that is linked or not, because they say this is what is expected based on the theory. They go a little bit further where they make a really good point here. They link this to another research question. This is research question 3, but it says, as mentioned research question 1, we know this is due to the removal of trees. So they are making an explicit linkage between their findings here and some results that they unpicked earlier on in their project. They've got some description of data in here too. Okay, so all three are written in different ways, but they show the key important parts of a project, which I'm just going to emphasize at the end of this tutorial, that the students make links between the data, the different bits of data that they've gathered. They make links to other research questions and to the aims, and they talk about similarities and contradictions between what they're discovering and the theories that they talked about in their background research. Everything is clear and explicit because everything is signposted through the words that they write. So they will talk figure 3 shows. This is proven or disproven by the theories written in my background research. And they're always supporting things with evidence from their data presentation. If you have a look here, this is where I would pause. Make sure you spend some time reading through these 5 points. You'll find this in the actual website, which you can spend more time looking at it. But these are critical things that you should be aiming to do in each of your 3 research questions. You should organize this with 3 clear research questions with the data presented and written about in separate mini chapters. And each research question should have around about 300 words of analysis where you discuss what the highlights of the results and how this relates to your theories.